But 6 seasons in a movie.
6 seasons in a movie.
6 seasons in a movie.
6 seasons in a movie!
The grandiose goal for a TV show is to make it onto the big screen. You might be surprised how many TV shows have done it. Of course, there were some that were more successful than others. Believe it or not, there are even a few anthology TV shows that became movies, which is not easy when you realize anthology shows don't have recurring characters. So which anthology shows pulled off this nearly impossible stunt? Tales from the Crypt tops the list with 2 motion pictures.
We're going to the movies!
In 1995, The Crypt Keeper presented Demon Knight. It was like one long episode of the TV show. And a year later came Bordello of Blood.
Cha-ching!
This sucks.
Tales from the Dark Side aired for 4 seasons, then made a feature film which was made up of multiple stories.
Well, that just about takes care of that, doesn't it?
But before any of those, there was Twilight Zone the movie, a controversial motion picture that didn't exactly connect with fans or critics.
Wouldn't you say with all the tradition of the Twilight Zone, they could have come up with 4 episodes, 4 strong ones instead of 2?
I wish they had.
But it turns out there's a handful of films that have some connection to the original series. Either they started out as a potential Twilight Zone feature film, or they capture the spirit of the show and can be considered honorary Twilight Zone movies. Yes, it's a very special episode of Anthology of Anthology TV Shows, the other Twilight Zone movies. Just to be clear, this video is not about films that seem to be ripping off old episodes of the Twilight Zone. That's a different list entirely, but for argument's sake, let's get those out of the way. This video is about the films that have a direct connection to the classic series or reflect the spirit of Rod Serling's unique vision. First up, the 1980s nuclear nightmare. Miracle Mile is a stunning piece of filmmaking. It starts off as a rom-com. Anthony Edwards plays Harry, a young and hip trombone player who finally meets a young lady he could see himself falling for. And then
It's really happening!
a wrong number from the Pentagon reveals that nuclear Armageddon is underway. The rest of the movie keeps you guessing. Is this real? Are the missiles going to come? Can it be avoided? Can the characters get out of there in time? It's a nerve-wracking thriller that all takes place during one incredible night. And the film is set to a propulsive score by Tangerine Dream. Now, at one point during the early 80s, the script for Miracle Mile was optioned as the Twilight Zone movie. Yes, before it became a Steven Spielberg movie that remade episodes of the TV show, the Twilight Zone movie was going to be one long story, and this was it. The script had a tense plot, well-rounded characters, and some great scenes set in a diner. Twilight Zone scholars have noted that Rod Serling loved using diners, because people from all walks of life can cross paths at an all-night diner. Anyway, Miracle Mile seemed like a perfect fit until the producers had one note that writer-director Steve DeJarnette could not accept. They wanted the movie to end with Anthony Edwards' character waking up from a bad dream. And then he goes off into the night, and the events of his dreams start to play out. It was a deal-breaker for DeJarnette. Lucky for us, he got to make the movie the way he intended. It's definitely worth seeking out. Which brings us to another nuclear panic film, the 1960s Cold War classic. Ladybug, Ladybug is the earliest example of an honorary Twilight Zone movie. It was made in 1963 when the Twilight Zone was still on the air. Right off the bat, the movie looks like the Twilight Zone with stark black and white cinematography. It's set in small-town America, and the whole movie is about fear of nuclear war.
Nuclear attack within 1 hour.
Directed by Frank Perry with a screenplay by Eleanor Perry, the movie is based on real events where a school's air raid siren goes off and the teachers have to walk their students back home. Like some episodes of The Twilight Zone, Ladybug, Ladybug features strong performances by children.
Let me in. Please. Please. No. There's no room.
Plus, it ends on a chilling note. The fear of nuclear war makes Ladybug feel like an episode of The Twilight Zone. The movie will appeal to fans of classic episodes like The Shelter or Time Enough at Last. Today's audiences will be shaken by the ending of Ladybug. And today's viewers will also say, hey, isn't that Mr. Feeney?
I'm gonna find out what the hell's going on.
Coming in at number 5, it's the giant boxing robot movie. Rod Serling loved boxing. He was a flyweight fighter during his time in the Army with a total of 17 bouts. Serling got his nose broken twice, which he credits for his distinct speech pattern.
Oh yes, I did forget something, didn't I?
Anyway, the guy loved boxing and he loved writing about boxing. He believed it was a metaphor for the fights we all face.
This wasn't the night, that's for sure.
Before creating The Twilight Zone, Serling penned Requiem for a Heavyweight, a live television drama starring Jack Palance. Requiem was a huge hit and was made into a major motion picture.
You gotta quit, Mom. You can't fight anymore.
Why? Because I got knocked out?
There are 2 episodes of The Twilight Zone about boxing. There's The Big Tall Wish, a touching story about an over-the-hill fighter. And then there's Steel, a less uplifting story set in a future where human boxing is illegal.
Only these automatons have been permitted in the ring since prize fighting was legally abolished in 1968.
When Lee Marvin's fighting machine breaks down, he's so desperate for money that he disguises himself as a robot and gets destroyed in the ring. This is a powerful episode. The script was written by Richard Matheson. He's the author of the novels I Am Legend, The Shrinking Man, and Hell House. His TV credits include Trilogy of Terror, The Night Stalker, and Duel.
That truck driver tried to kill me.
Kill you?
And he wrote some iconic episodes of the original Twilight Zone.
On The Twilight Zone next comes more exciting work from the typewriter of Richard Matheson.
My favorite Matheson episode is Nightmare at 20,000 Feet.
Look, he's crawling on...
But Matheson's favorite episode was Steel. And that same story was the basis for the movie Real Steel.
Bot don't fight. You don't get paid. Woo! How about that?
When the film came out, people assumed it was based on Rock'em Sock'em robots. But no, it was loosely based on an episode of The Twilight Zone. Of course, the bleak story is altered by executive producer Steven Spielberg. In typical Spielberg fashion, they added a precocious kid. Director Sean Levy said the goal was, let's do a f***ing cool-as-hell boxing robot action movie as a Trojan horse for a father-son movie.
Sounds worse than it is.
Really?
Real Steel is a great father-son movie, but it's far removed from the original episode, which played like a bleak film noir. In the movie version, Hugh Jackman's character fights remotely. He delivers uppercuts without ever receiving a punch inside the ring. And that wasn't the only change in tone. I guess that's why the credits specifically say, based in part on the Matheson story. Number 4, from the director of Donnie Darko. Another story from the mind of Richard Matheson. It was originally published as a short story called Button Button, and it was made into an episode of The Twilight Zone. Well, it was made into an episode of the 80s Twilight Zone. I know, not everyone is a fan of that reboot, but there are some good episodes, like this one. You may wonder, why wasn't Button Button adapted for the original Twilight Zone? The answer is, it hadn't been written yet. Button Button was first published in 1970 in the June issue of Playboy. Since then, it's been reprinted in countless short story collections, so even if you haven't seen the film or the episode, you might be familiar with the premise. A mysterious man arrives at a couple's home. His offer is simple.
If you push the button, 2 things will happen. First, someone will die. Second, you will receive a payment of $1 million.
The film is set in 1976, when $1 million is a hell of a lot of money.
$1 million.
Now, the original story was written by Richard Matheson, who has a reputation for being an efficient storyteller. He once described his style as follows: a good piece of writing is as clean as a hound's tooth. but the movie was adapted by Richard Kelly, whose approach is anything but lean. The director adds a backstory about the mysterious man. There's a complicated subplot about life on Mars. There's mind control and characters getting those science fiction nosebleeds. There's an ominous Santa Claus. There's Cameron Diaz and her damaged foot. Watching this movie, you'll be left with a lot of questions, including, what is up with Cameron Diaz's accent?
I have no idea.
After an hour and 55 minutes, the only button you'll regret pushing is play. Bottom line, the box works as a short story. It works as a 19-minute TV episode, but the feature film has metaphysical tangents that never really pay off. If you love Richard Kelly's Donnie Darko, then you might like The Box, because there are some similar moments of big swing science fiction weirdness. And if you love Richard Kelly's Southland Tales, then we should hang out. Maybe we can figure out if we genuinely like Southland Tales or if we're just being contrarian. And yes, I read the Southland Tales graphic novel prequels, so you can go to the comment section and ask me anything. Just please don't write, "This guy didn't get The Box." Coming in at number 3, the Disney theme park ride movie. Did you know Disney's Tower of Terror is the first movie based on a theme park ride? And that theme park ride was originally called the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror. The attraction was created by Disney MGM Studios in 1994 to compete with the Free Fall ride at Six Flags.
Drops you off.
Visitors would walk through the abandoned hotel and were greeted by footage of Rod Serling.
This, as you may recognize, is a maintenance service elevator.
This was extra spooky since Serling himself had been dead for nearly 20 years. After a short video about the hotel's haunted history, visitors are led to an elevator, which takes them up and then drops them down 200 feet. The attraction's film segments were directed by Joe Dante.
Ready and action.
Not only was he one of the directors of the 1983 Twilight Zone movie, he also helmed an episode of the 80s reboot.
I am the Shadow Man.
Tower of Terror, the movie, accurately retells the story of the ride. A group of people disappear inside the Hollywood Tower Hotel, and it's up to a fringe reporter, played by Steve Guttenberg, to solve the mystery, with the help of his niece, played by Kirsten Dunst. And for better or worse, it's the kind of ghost story you'd expect from Disney.
Sally's love for Abigail broke the spell.
In the book about her father's life, Anne Serling notes why the theme park attraction and the movie don't quite work for her.
There is actually little of the true spirit of the Twilight Zone, lacking the commentary on the nature of man or imaginative explorations of other dimensions.
She's right. The movie is not interested in the nature of man. Maybe that's why Disney didn't include the Twilight Zone name in the film's title. Or maybe it was for tax purposes. Anyway, it feels less like an episode of The Twilight Zone and more like an episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark? Probably because it's written and directed by DJ McHale, the co-creator of Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Go find your own grave. Sorry.
So even though Tower of Terror has a direct link to the original series, it might not appeal to the fans.
You interested?
No.
No. No. What? No.
Today, the Tower of Terror attraction has been rebranded as Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout. And Disney has announced plans for a movie reboot starring Scarlett Johansson, but there's been no mention of using the Twilight Zone name. What a relief. Number 2, the other black and white movie. In some ways, Seconds is the film that best captures the spirit of the Twilight Zone. It's like how there are 2 film versions of The Killer Inside Me, but the movie that comes closest to the book is Serial Mom. Here's what I mean. Seconds has the look of the Twilight Zone, and it tackles some of the same themes, with a middle-aged professional who commutes into the city each day and feels stuck in a loveless marriage.
Frankly, during the last few years, we hardly ever.
There's stylish cinematography and a lot of emotion about the trappings of suburban America during the prosperous mid-century.
That's quite an analysis.
The movie features an eerie organization that's like a funhouse mirror of corporate bureaucracy.
Would you step in, please, sir?
And the movie's plot is very similar to the Twilight Zone episode The Trade-Ins. That's the one where senior citizens can exchange their old bodies for new ones. I don't want to give too much away, but the movie ends with a horrific twist, just like a good Twilight Zone episode.
Needle, please.
There are a couple of other connections worth mentioning. Seconds has a memorable score by Jerry Goldsmith, who composed music for the original series and for the 1983 Twilight Zone movie. Seconds was directed by one of Rod Serling's frequent collaborators, John Frankenheimer. They teamed up to make the 1964 film 7 Days in May. And before that, they worked on a live TV broadcast of The Comedian.
Well, let me tell you something right now, Buster. This show stays the way it is this year, next week, week after week.
So you've got Frankenheimer direction, Goldsmith score, stark cinematography, and a premise that's similar to a season 3 episode. These are just some of the ways Seconds is an honorary Twilight Zone movie. And our number one honorary Twilight Zone movie, what else? Planet of the Apes. I know what some of you are going to say. Calling Planet of the Apes a movie version of The Twilight Zone is like calling Psycho a movie version of Alfred Hitchcock Presents. You know what? I do consider Psycho a movie version of Alfred Hitchcock Presents. It was shot with the same crew, it was filmed on the Universal lot, it was shot in black and white, and Hitchcock based the final shot of Psycho on Lamb to the Slaughter, an episode of the TV series that he directed 2 years earlier. Same ending, right down to the killer's smile. Now let's get back to the apes. Rod Serling co-wrote the screenplay to Planet of the Apes. Like a good episode of The Twilight Zone, the film combines science fiction with social commentary.
Take your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
And the first act of the script is very reminiscent of the Twilight Zone episode, I Shot an Arrow into the Air. Both stories follow a group of astronauts who crash land on a planet. Not all of the astronauts survive. The ones who do wander around a barren landscape. And then, double spoiler alert,
damn you all to hell!
Both stories end with the astronauts realizing they were on Earth all along.
Oh my God, I was wrong. It was Earth all along.
Right now, I need to give a shout out to one of my all-time favorite mashups. A genius over at the Forbidden Zone, a now-defunct Planet of the Apes fan site, re-edited the movie into a 25-minute video that looked like an episode of The Twilight Zone. It's a spot-on recreation in boxy black and white. This is a must-watch for fans of the movie or the TV show. It even ends with a repurposed Rod Serling outro.
For civilization to survive, the human race has to remain civilized. Tonight's very small exercise in logic from The Twilight Zone.
Speaking of outros, that just about does it for this video about the honorary Twilight Zone movies. Let us know in the comments if we forgot any. Maybe you'll be the first to point out Encounter with the Unknown, which was narrated by Mr. Serling. Also, be sure to subscribe to Atomic Abe, hit the notification bell so you'll never miss a video, and why not check out some of our previous videos about Anthology TV shows, like the time Steve Martin tried to create a comedy version of The Twilight Zone. There's even an episode where 2 astronauts crash land in Las Vegas.